The Spanish Empire had a real opportunity to conquer Ireland, and it wasn't a slim chance. In 1647, the Irish practically begged Philip IV to be their king, or to appoint his son as the King of Ireland. It was a real opportunity built over decades of wars, secret alliances, and bloody rebellions. One of the greatest empires the world has ever seen had a strategic advantage, with local allies ready to fight by its side. But at the decisive moment, it simply backed down. And that raises a number of questions for us. Why did an empire capable of dominating half the globe not conquer such a prosperous island so close by? What was Ireland's political situation then? How did Spain become increasingly involved in the island's conflicts? What made Philip IV conclude that conquering Ireland would be a mistake even with the invitation in hand? And what does that have to do with several viceroys in Spanish America having Irish ancestry? In today's video, we will dive into the history of the forgotten relationship between Ireland and the Spanish Empire and understand how this alliance was built over a century and why it ended in the most surprising way possible. But before we start the video, if you enjoy our content, become a member of our channel right now. That way, you'll have access to our group and exclusive content, including live classes, so you can dive even deeper into the hidden side of history. Around the year 1600, the political and social situation in Ireland was complex and full of conflict. The island was made up of 4 groups who lived in constant tension. First, the native Irish, of Gaelic culture and Catholic faith, who made up the majority of the population. Next came the Old English, who were also mostly Catholic. There were also the New English, represented by those sent from London in the 16th century, who were Protestants and Anglicans. And finally, a minority of Protestant Scots, especially in the north of the island. And, as shown by the article by Rafael Valladares from the University of Lisbon, for many years, English rule over Ireland was much more nominal than real. For the English of the 16th and 17th centuries, the Irish represented savagery and barbarism. That's because they spoke the difficult language Gaelic and kept many traditions that were hard to assimilate. Their economy, based on agriculture and herding, limited the use of currency, with much of the population bartering, which made it very difficult for the English to collect taxes. But, interestingly, it was Henry VIII's break with Rome that divided the subjects of the 2 islands even more. Under the House of Tudor, the English crown had begun a firm policy to bring Ireland under English rule. In 1541, Henry VIII managed to be recognized as the King of Ireland, and titles of nobility were granted to some Irish families. But these titles came with a high price: the constant loss of autonomy that these families had over their territories. And it was precisely from the oppression of this neighboring island that Catholicism became not just a faith, but also an instrument of political resistance. Being Catholic in Ireland also came to mean resisting the English crown. And that's where the importance of Spain comes in. In the 16th century, Spain was not only a global superpower, but also the universal Catholic monarchy. It was the empire on which the sun never set, and it financed wars in Europe in defense of Catholicism. Thus, during the reign of Philip II, the Spanish increasingly supported the Irish Catholics who rebelled against Elizabeth I of England. This happened at the same time that England supported the Calvinist Dutch, who rebelled against Spanish rule in Flanders. Ireland, therefore, was a perfect front to weaken the enemy, with the Spanish sending especially economic support and war materials. But the game wouldn't change with the disaster of Philip II's Spanish Armada. When the Spanish sailed around Great Britain, terrible weather struck the fleet off the coast of Ireland, causing 24 ships to sink. And so, 6,000 Spaniards ended up dying, many of them in the shipwreck and many others reaching the coast of Ireland and being captured by the English. However, many Spaniards were also sheltered and hidden by the Irish. Brian O'Rourke, for example, the important Irish leader, helped hide more than 80 Spaniards. The English ordered his arrest in Scotland so that he could be tried, promising royal pardon beforehand. That's because, as an Irishman, he could only be tried in Ireland. The Scots then hand Brian over so that he can be tried by the English. But there, the promise is broken, and he ends up being summarily executed by order of Queen Elizabeth. However, while previously Spain limited itself to sending economic aid, under Philip III, support for Ireland became much more serious, with direct military intervention. And the moment that crystallized this was the uprising of the Earl of Tyrone, Hugh O'Neill, in 1594. Because it coincided with the most serious phase of the Anglo-Spanish War, this uprising soon raised the specter of an Ireland allied with the Spanish crown. And this fear reached its peak in 1601 when about 4,000 Spanish soldiers landed at a port in southern Ireland called Kinsale, with troops ready to support the Earl of Tyrone. But a series of coordination failures, bad weather, and lack of communication on the battlefield caused the endeavor to fail. The Spanish landed in the south at 3 different positions, were slow to receive reinforcements, were hit by bad weather, and had a lot of difficulty establishing effective communication on the ground, especially with the Earl of Tyrone. The Spanish were so eager to help the Irish that only halfway through their journey to Ireland did they decide where they would land, ending up hundreds of kilometers away from the Irish Earl's territory. If Ireland had an organized kingdom, it would have been a much easier undertaking. However, the territory was controlled by highly fragmented noble families and earls, which sometimes made organizing a rebellion difficult, especially with some families being loyal to the English. And so because of this lack of coordination, O'Neill's rebellion was suppressed. In 1603, the English crown defeated the Earl of Tyrone, who fled to Rome in 1607 in an event known as the Flight of the Earls, a tragic event that is still remembered today by Irish nationalism. And he even, in his last days, wrote to Philip III asking him not to give up on conquering Ireland and keeping it under Catholic rule. Despite the English victory, the Spanish campaign in Ireland made it clear that this territory was an open wound in England's flank. And so, 2 years later, in 1605, Spain and England signed the Peace of London, thus putting an end to the conflict. But Spain's involvement with Ireland was not over yet. It had just changed form. The island of Ireland, despite its limited economy, had a high population growth, with large families in its various counties, and thus soon became an ideal center for military recruitment. Spain needed soldiers like never before, especially for the tercios in Flanders in the war against the Dutch. And the Irish, exiled by the English authorities, were tough, tall, motivated, and plentiful warriors. And in this way, Madrid would not waste this resource. Thus, many Irishmen joined the ranks of the Spanish army. However, in October 1641, right in the middle of recruiting Irishmen, a new uprising against England broke out, which was something unexpected even for the Spanish. And so England plunged into yet another civil war. The Irish Catholic nobles formed their own government, the Confederate Catholics of Ireland, and began to openly announce that they would form an alliance with whoever was most willing to help them. Philip IV could not ignore that. With this revolt, Spain found itself in a delicate position. On one hand, Ireland was a great source of soldiers for its armies. Losing this resource to France or to the English Parliament would be a huge blow. But, on the other hand, any more direct action could trigger an open war with England at the worst possible moment. Philip IV's Spain was in an unprecedented crisis. It was simultaneously facing the Dutch in the 80 Years' War, the French in the 30 Years' War, and internally, it was also fighting against the revolt in Catalonia and the restoration of Portugal, which had just separated from the Iberian Union. The empire was being pulled and tugged from all sides at the same time. And it was in this context that a proposal emerged that seemed to solve everything. In 1647, Count Oñate, the Spanish ambassador to the Holy See, received a direct message for King Philip IV, stating that Ireland would be placed at the Pope's disposal. The anti-French faction of the Irish Provisional Government seized the moment and pleaded with the Pope to grant the island to Philip IV, or else to his legitimate son, John Joseph of Austria. The goal was to eliminate France's claims to the island once and for all, and to secure Spanish protection. It seemed like the opportunity Spain had always been waiting for. They were no longer disorganized counts, but rather the proposal for the consolidation of a kingdom and a crown, the crown of Ireland, in the hands of a Spaniard. And that was when Philip IV called his Council of State to decide once and for all what to do. And the result was unanimous. The Irish venture should not be carried out. That's because it was a perfect proposal, something Spain had always dreamed of, but it was made at the wrong time. The risk of failure was immense, the cost of the operation was prohibitive, and the danger of provoking a war against the English Parliament, which had just defeated King Charles I in the Civil War, would be catastrophic. Spain was not in a position to annex new territories. The Castilians were at war with Portugal and Catalonia, while also fighting the 80 Years' War and the 30 Years' War, all with their coffers depleted. Rafael Valladares, in his article, mentions that as if it weren't enough, they were bogged down in foreign campaigns, and their own territory was falling apart. Philip IV also saw the southeast of Spain being ravaged by a terrible plague. In other words, he had no way to collect taxes in a very large region because of the plague. That way, Felipe needed to recover the territories he had lost and keep the ones he still had, instead of getting involved in an expensive adventure to Ireland. Wasn't that decision made from weakness? Was it a cold, rational calculation by an empire that knew its limits? An empire that had fought against the whole world for a century and now understood there were no human or financial resources for yet another front? And so, Spanish intervention in Ireland was definitively buried. In 1649, Oliver Cromwell completed the reconquest of Ireland with brutality, and the rebellion ended in defeat. But what is fascinating about this whole story is that even without the formal conquest of Ireland, because of the recruitment of Irishmen, many left a deep mark on the Spanish Empire, especially in the Bourbon era. As many Irishmen took refuge in Spain fleeing English persecution, and sometimes served in the ranks of the empire, they ended up marrying Spanish women or having their daughters married to Spanish men. And so, a large number of Irishmen and descendants of Irishmen held positions both in the army and in the administration of the empire itself. Alejandro O'Reilly, born in Ireland, became Inspector General of the Spanish Infantry and was governor of Louisiana and was made a count. Carlos Howard, also Irish, governed West Florida. The Irishman Hugo O'Connor was governor of Yucatan. Felix Berenguer de Marquina, who was Viceroy of New Spain, had an Irish mother. Sebastian Quindolin, who was governor of Cuba, had a father who had emigrated from Ireland to Spain. And when Mexico was seeking its independence from Spain, the very viceroy who signed the agreements was a Spanish officer of Irish origin, Juan O'Donoghue y O'Ryan. In the Viceroyalty of Peru, the viceroy was none other than Ambrosio O'Higgins, who was born in Ireland. In fact, his illegitimate son, Bernardo O'Higgins, would become a hero of Chile's independence. In other words, Ireland was never conquered by Spain, even though it wished it had been. But It helped build the Spanish Empire from the inside out through its exiled sons, who found a second homeland on the Iberian Peninsula. Ireland could have been not only Catholic, but also Spanish. As we have seen, the Irish even begged the Spanish Habsburgs to take over the island against the English. But in the end, it ended up being British and marked by centuries of religious oppression. This was not so much due to Spain's lack of willingness to help an ally, but rather due to the empire's lack of capacity, which was fighting against the whole world at the same time, and was struggling for brief moments of peace to catch its breath while getting bogged down in religious wars in the Mediterranean, in Central and Northern Europe. And did you know about this relationship between Spain and Ireland? What surprised you the most? So go ahead and leave your comment right now to support our work, and take the opportunity to become a member of the channel right now. That way, you'll be able to dive deeper and learn even more about the fascinating Iberian history.